Hey, world history students. Today we're going to continue talking about the age of exploration. We're seeing a lot of new colonies popping up all over the New World that Christopher Columbus, discovered. And so we've talked a lot about Portugal and Spain being the early leaders in those exploration days and gaining a lot of wealth and seeking out that God, glory, and gold. Those three G's that we talked about. Well, today we're focusing specifically on North America, and we're focused more on the English, French, and the Dutch that came afterwards. Okay, so today we're looking again at North American exploration, and now we're going to start focusing more on colonies. Okay, we're going to stay here a while. So this is, before we get into the New World, this is kind of what the Old World looks at the time. And the guys that we're going to focus on today are England, France, and a little bit of the Netherlands, which is a part of the Holy Roman Empire at this time. They'll gain their independence here pretty soon. And we know about Spain and Portugal already being the leaders there. Okay, so after Portugal and Spain took the early lead, the English and the French saw all that wealth they were gaining and wanted some of that new land for themselves. And so what they did was they went some places that the Spanish and the Portuguese really hadn't gone so far yet, and that was North America and pretty much modern day Canada and the United States. And really they were only focused on up through the eastern coast right here. And the French settled in modern day Canada and down the Mississippi River Valley. Okay? The English were more along the American coastline from about Georgia up through parts of Maine. The difference between the two is both of them did set up colonies. However, you need to know that the French colonies differed from the English colonies in that they were more just trading posts. All right, they wanted to trade like they did in the Indian Ocean world, but they wanted to trade with the Native Americans that way. They got furs and beads and other types of goods from Native Americans, which they traded for things like guns, horses, and other supplies that were not common for the Native Americans. So they got French goods and they traded with one another, and they actually got along pretty well. There wasn't many French settlers to begin with, and they had a pretty good relationship. So the French and the Indians, or excuse me, the Native Americans, got along very well. Now the English, not so much. And the main reason why is that the English are actually a little bit different than the rest of the people we've talked about, in that they have a lot of settlers that come here to stay. They're motivated by different things, such as trying to find wealth through farming. We're going to see the great plantations during this time in the South. We're also going to see religious movements come here in the form of Puritans and Quakers and other religious groups. And these people are here for other reasons other than just trading. They want to make a living for themselves, and they want a new place where they can worship more freely. A lot of English settlers are using joint stock companies, where basically everybody pays into a one company, and they send a group of explorers, and those explorers bring back wealth, and they bring the people that paid their money into the company, back the wealth they got in the colonies, kind of like the modern day stock system. Okay, so the English had a lot more settlers, and really because of that, did not get along well with the Native Americans. We're going to see the Native Americans and English, for the most part, did not get along. This is kind of what it looked like once they started colonizing. If you can see in the map here on the left, the English is here in yellow and goes from about Georgia all the way up through Maine. And that was the English territory, and it stopped along the Appalachian Mountains. And pretty much everything west of the Appalachian Mountains, all the way through the Mississippi River Valley, modern-day Louisiana, Great Lakes region, and all of Canada, all of this was part of France. France controlled a lot of territory, but again, not many people lived here. This is relatively uninhabited, except for a few places along the rivers where they traded with Native Americans. You can see here on the right side the different exploration tracks, and you can see some of your explorers here and where they went, and get you a good idea of what was being taken over, where people went, and how they claimed that land. Well, this is what it looked like after it all shook out. Spain also has some land here. Notice Florida is part of Spain, and that will pretty much be the case for a while until America gets its independence. All right, so the English colony grows. Their first permanent settlement was in modern-day Virginia at a town called Jamestown. It was very difficult. Many people died. The settlement finally takes hold, but only through help with the native groups, which is surprising because there on after they won't have very good relations with those Native American groups. But early on, it was really only because of those native groups that they were able to survive the harsh winters without knowledge of how the land works, without knowledge of the modern farming technology in North America. And so it wasn't a certain thing that these colonies were going to take off, but they would soon grow and become very wealthy and very powerful. And again, England has the largest colonial population, as you can see here in this graph. 1650 have less than 100,000, and less than 100 years later, there's over 1 million people in the English colonies, and that's permanent settlers. And some of those settlers are located along the American coast. Two groups that we talk about a lot, and maybe you've heard of, are the Pilgrims. These are Protestant groups, which we've talked about in England, that left Europe to seek more religious freedom. All right, they were being persecuted, they were being cast down upon because of their religion, and they wanted a place where they could get away from all of that and just worship God in their own way. And so what they did was they sailed on the Mayflower and took that to the American colonies and found a new life for themselves. So a lot of people saw this not only to make money, but also as a new way of life, a new start. And so we're going to see this come in the form of a large population growth in the English American colonies. Another group that we talked about is very similar in that the Puritans did this as well. They were not necessarily being persecuted like some of the Pilgrims were. However, they wanted a religion that was wholly different than what the Anglican Church was all about. They wanted more reforms than what the English Church was willing to do. And so they went off and decided to worship in their own way, similar to the Pilgrims, and they formed their own colony. And we're going to see several other groups do the same type of thing. But the major goal that I want you to understand here is that the population in England's colonies in America boomed, and there's a large population growth. So there's some conflict between the different European claims here as well. Well, number one, the Netherlands had settled modern-day New York for a long period of time. They had a relatively small population, and that's part of it was right in the middle between England's colonies. So what they did was they took them over. All right, it was very easily because remember, England has a much larger colonist population. They easily knocked out the Dutch in modern-day New York. Okay. They also had some conflict with the Native Americans. Many of the Native American groups had land that the English colonists wanted, and they took it. They had the better weapons. Remember, their populations had dwindled because of disease, the Native American groups did. And so, it was relatively easy for the English colonists to take them over. And finally, they had a big conflict with the French settlers. Remember, there's not a large French population here, and there was a large English population. Well, they decided it wasn't big enough for the both of them. They actually went to war. The French and the Indians actually teamed up. They call it the French and Indian War because the French and the Native Americans fought against the British and the American colonists. And the American colonists and the British win. All right, so, and that forces France to give up all their territory that you can see here in yellow. They have to give all that up, and it goes between England, and then Spain split the rest. Okay, so the French are gone from North America after the French and Indian War. And I know that's a misleading name, but you need to know that the British and American colonists defeated the French and the Indians. And the French and the Indians were allies in that war. Okay? But they ended up losing, and they lost all of their land here in North America in 1763, just before the American independence. And we're going to talk more about this war later on in a later unit. So just want to leave you with one last thing here. I want you to see the population decline of Native American groups, and I want you to see that along with the growth of English American colonists.